Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sean Pather, and it is my pleasure to be your program director this evening. May I ask you to please rise as we sing the South African National Anthem. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Honored guests, it's an immense pleasure for us to see you all in person this evening at the 7th Annual Archbishop Thabo Makgoba Development Trust Lecture Series. We wish we would have seen more of you in person. Events of today have impacted on us. But for those of you present and for those of you online, it's great to reconnect with you as we do once a year in this lecture series. I'd like to, at the outset, recognize our honored guests. First and foremost, Archbishop Dr. Thabo Makgoba, our Chancellor. Thank you for being with us. Our honored guest, Commissioner Edward Kisvetter. Thank you very much for coming all the way down to Cape Town to be with us this evening. Members of Council present, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, Professor Lavak, our Dean, Professor Esau, other members of the Executive Management of the faculty and wider university, partners present from government, non-government sectors, civil society, and industry, both here and online. We've had over 200 plus responses. With all protocols observed, I don't want to steal the thunder of our DVC academic to say the words of welcome. So let me pause at this time before I make any further remarks and ask Prof. Vivian Lavak to bid you welcome. Thank you.
Program Director, Professor Sean Pather, is very naughty because I'm on strict instructions from our Dean here, Prof. Iso, to be very brief in my welcome. Our Chancellor, Mr. Kisvetter, our Commissioner, our speaker here tonight, all our honored guests, all protocols observed, we've agreed that he will do the full list. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you here tonight at what has become for us one of those special moments in the calendar of UWC, our Arch's own public lecture, sponsored by his Development Trust. And what is really, given the times that we're finding ourselves in, as I was reflecting on tonight, thinking, if any of us open any newspaper, whether it's online like we these days do with News 24 and Daily Maverick and all of those, whether we actually have a physical newspaper, whatever news you're following, whether it's radio, etc., what is the one thing that we always find? Crime, fraud, corruption. Crime, fraud, corruption. In all its many guises. And one can actually become quite depressed if that's all that you hear every day. And so we've all followed the Zondo Commission and the various other commissions. And we've seen recently Professor Jonathan Jansen's book, because universities, we're not exempt. We are microcosms of our society, and we're not exempt from those societal ills or those societal structural systemic issues that we are experiencing in South Africa. And with his book, Corrupted, and then followed by that, everything that we're seeing playing out at the university of our sister university, University of Fort Hare, it makes one ponder and think, how did we get here? And therefore, I find it very apt that the theme tonight that we're really going to look at, not just the ethics of it, but integrity. There's something very personal around integrity and leadership. And what makes it interesting, I've just asked the commissioner, so how is he experiencing it? And he said it's very tough. But from our vantage point, what we're seeing is that there's one agency or organ of government that's doing their level best when we talk about ethics, when we talk about integrity, and when we're talking about ethical leadership especially. And from that perspective, what resonates with me is the fact that I always tell people that you only have one integrity. It's not something, if you compromise it once, it's gone. It's who you are when nobody sees what you're doing. And your word should be your promise. And that should be infusing the way in which we lead, irrespective of what level of leadership we are as a university. And that's something that personally for me, and on behalf of the university, really resonates quite strongly around. Mrs. Raymond is sitting here in front, and we're always having this conversation. She's the departmental chairperson of accounting. And I'm, of course, hoping that after commissioners done all this speech, that we can make sure that there's a lovely connection between SARS, and I have to punt our great accounting department and their wonderful results that they've received, 100% pass rate. But we always have this conversation. What are those kind of, if we're looking, for example, at the CA 2025, your competencies that you're supposed to have in 2025, it's not only those hard knowledge competencies that we need, but it's also the softer things. And one of those very important softer things would be around integrity, around ethics, making sure that our students can navigate the kind of environment that you find hard, that we all find hard in the changing world of work. So what makes UWC different? In 2017, I started in 2017, 2018, I had a whole series of what I call courageous conversations. First on campus, and then with our alumni. I probably reached about more than 1,000 alumni with the courageous conversations. And the question I asked the alumni was as follows: what is our intellectual identity? What was our historical intellectual identity? And what about that intellectual identity do we take forward into the future? What's so important that we garner that for the future? And one of the key things that came up, and I call it, the way they said at the time, it's a critical engagement with societal issues, but the way the alumni explained it to me, and I mentioned it recently at the graduation speech, it's that hardigheid, that chutzpah, not being afraid to tackle societal issues. And I think we as UWC, we have to ask ourselves if we still have that. And that is a conversation that we're currently having. To say that we cannot stand away from what's happening in society, but that we as UWC should be engaging firmly and critically through our, what we now call our scholarship of engagement for societal impact, where we make sure that when we deal with the community issues, when we are in communities, we work with communities, co-creators of that knowledge, and when we engage with different kinds of communities, that we do so through our scholarship at UWC. Not for scholarship in itself, in the end of scholarship or as a means to an end, but more importantly, for societal impact. So Commissioner Kieswetter, we're really looking forward to your engagement in this public lecture tonight. We do hope that for all those that can't be here, something about the Arch's lecture that draws interesting activities on campus. 2017, and here we are again. But we have an engaging audience, and I hope that everyone will enjoy what we are going to be hearing from you and from the Arch in his welcome as well. And then, of course, as I said, I'm looking forward to an engagement beyond tonight with SARS and with our Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, not only the Department of Accounting. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Levak. You did very well to listen to the Dean, taking just 1 minute extra. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, before I call upon the Archbishop to make some opening remarks, I just want to recognize and pay tribute to the work that the Archbishop does. The Trust, in recognizing the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, unemployment in the country, has a mandate to drive initiatives to bring about change. And of the many initiatives that it tackles, including among youth, entrepreneurship, and the like, it has started this lecture series, and UWC is one of a few universities that has been charged to deal and lead debate and discourse around key matters. And ours is that of integrity and leadership, as Prof. Levak has just mentioned. And over the years, we've posed vexing questions around integrity and leadership. And Commissioner Kieswetter, your predecessors in this lecture series are Deputy Chief Justice Dikang in 2017, the former Minister in the Treasury, Trevor Manuel, in 2018, the former Public Protector in 2019, Professor Thuli Madonsela. In 2020, we had a panel on the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the ethics that the Fourth Industrial Revolution poses on leadership and digitization. In 21, we hosted the Minister of Small Business Development, then Minister Khumbudzo Nshaveni. And last year, we had Mr. Sidney Nhlanhla, group head of Sanlam. So you have a long list of illustrious speakers behind you, Commissioner. And so that is the work of the Trust. And we've harnessed that opportunity as UWC to deal with these vexing questions of leadership and integrity. And so with that framing of the public lecture series, I'd like to call upon our beloved Archbishop Thabo Makgoba.
Thank you so much, Program Director, DVC, the Dean, Commissioner, and all important guests that are here today. I'm humbled by what you have said and what Commissioner Kieswetter has said. He's here, but after the lecture, traveling back to Johannesburg in order to be on a flight at 1 a.m. to Madagascar. So it shows the level of commitment that the Commissioner has, and for that, we are most grateful. One thing that I've learned at UWC, particularly at graduations, is how different faith groups are merged in. You know, I used to say I'm an interfaith person, but it was mainly at a theological level, at a meetings level, and the different faiths here are weaved in such a beautiful way. I think it was Raymond Ackerman, I hope I'm quoting him correctly, who said bishops, which is an Anglican school where he went, made him a better Jew by really doing what they do very well. So today, Commissioner and ladies and gentlemen, please bear with me if I reflect from Mark 12:17. I've chosen that one specifically for you, Commissioner, because it talks about a beautiful answer where Jesus says to those that were trying to trap him, you know, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. In other words, I think the writer was trying to say, in whatever you say, be balanced, be nuanced, but please don't be afraid to be forthright in raising issues of integrity, that even the issues that belong to Caesar, that is the taxes, must be paid for the good of the city. So I really pray today that what I saw in the news media, that after this year's budget speech by Minister of Finance, you have been called to, you've been called the hero of the national budget for the second year running. Your team having raised an estimated tax revenue of 1.7 trillion for 2022-2023 really deserves that accolade. 94 billion higher than the previous estimate. So we need to really take care of you because you actually make this country a jail. So to give some ideas to us lay people of how important this is, SARS revenue finance 90% of government spending. And we in higher education ought to be most grateful for the work that your department does. So we, the people of South Africa, are proud of you, sir, and hope that you will convey our thanks and our congratulations to all who work with you. We know that you will still face many challenges and difficulties, and we pray for the continued strength as you continue to perform your absolutely essential role in the development of our country and the welfare of all its people. Once again, at least from my own corner, I will encourage Anglicans to give Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Thank you.
Well said, Archbishop. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to call upon the Dean of the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, Professor Michel Issau, to provide an overview and set the context before we call upon our guest speaker, Professor Issau.
Good evening, everyone. My DVC is asking me if I need glasses because I have a 14-point and I realized I have an empty glass case in my bag, so things are blur. What a privilege it is, Archbishop, to host our 7th public lecture in person after 3 years of virtual. I would like to acknowledge our Archbishop. I'd also like to acknowledge our guest of honor and our keynote speaker, the SARS Commissioner. And it's such a blessing, Commissioner, that you've made this happen. When I spoke, or Beatrix called me and she said, the Commissioner said I must make it happen that he's here on the 9th of May. So it really is such a privilege, and we are really blessed that you've made the time. Our DVC academic, Professor Vivian Levac, thank you for being here, but also for standing in for our our rector who sends his apologies. And then all protocols observed, because if I've given my line manager strict time limits, then I need to stick to that. I reflected on the theme for this year's series, and I wanted to encourage a more positive discussion than what we've become accustomed to hearing through the media and other sources over the past few years, and more so during the time of the pandemic. Our senses, as Professor Lavaca said, in some respects, have become numb to news about the state of our economy, the ongoing energy crisis, fraud, corruption, and mismanagement, and the like. Indeed, these are important problems to reflect on, with a view to find practical solutions in the broader context of a better life for all. But there are good news stories that don't always get told, and from which we can draw learnings. This is what I thought we needed at this moment in time, as we are all trying to transition back to our different sectors after the COVID-19 pandemic. Our nation has come through a trying time because of the pandemic, and certain things have worsened as a result of it. We need some form of encouragement and motivation. The story of SARS's transformation and reform, in my view, is one example of a good news story. However, when I invited the SARS Commissioner to participate in our 7th public lecture series, I did not necessarily want to place the spotlight on the context of SARS and put him under pressure to talk to challenges and opportunities, but instead I thought it would be valuable to listen to his reflections on effective leadership and the leadership attributes that matter when faced with challenges, change, and transformation. I am of the view that effective leadership is grounded in individuals who live purpose-driven lives, who are mindful of the limitations of time, and who use their God-given gifts, talents, and experiences to make every moment count. As I reflected on my introductory comments for this evening, I pulled one of the books that I have on my shelf by Amartya Sen titled Development as Freedom. Whilst it may be a dated source being published in the late 20th century, it still has relevance in terms of the perspectives related to the unequal distribution of wealth, the problem of oppression and deprivation. Deprivation, contrary to some beliefs, is not an isolated reality facing poorer countries. It's a condition that affects rich countries too. According to Amartya Sen, overcoming the problems of deprivation, oppression, and destitution is central to development, be it social, economic, or political. To this end, leadership is crucial. Leadership in its different forms and natures, leadership across different sectors of our society, and leadership of self. Against this background, I would like to thank the Commissioner in advance for taking time out of your busy schedule to address us this evening. I look forward to your reflections. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean, for framing and giving us context around leadership and the brief to our guest speaker this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, as we head towards the keynote address in this evening's public lecture, just to remind us, last year South Africa celebrated the 25th anniversary of the establishment of the post-apartheid South African Revenue Service. The current commissioner of SARS was brought in at a time where there was damning findings by the Nugent Commission of deliberate attempts to dismantle this wonderful institute, vested, as the Archbishop says, to keep the country running. And so in the face of this evidence of these atrocities at SARS, the country turned to somebody to lead it with integrity and with the highest level of ethics to keep it on the straight and narrow. So it's in no small way that the Dean thought of how to bring upon the guest speaker for this evening's lecture around integrity and leadership. And so the country turned to Commissioner Kiswetter, who now has a few years under his belt, and he was being briefed to give a good news story. Perhaps as I call Commissioner Kiswetter up, let me just share with you a little bit more. He joined or rejoined SARS in 2019. Prior to that, he had served as the founding group executive of SARS Large Business Center and High Net Worth Unit. That's the unit that brings the biggest monies. He was SARS Chief Operating Officer, Deputy Commissioner during the period 2004 to 9. From 2010 to 16, he had moved on as Group Chief Executive for Alexander Forbes Group Holdings, where there was a successful turnaround, and the country was listed on the JSE. Edward has held senior executive roles at First Rand Banking Group and Eskom. More recently, at that time Eskom had the lights on, more recently he managed his own investments and served on various boards, among others Transnet, and the chair of the Technology Innovation Agency and lead independent Shoprite Holdings. Of course, he had to relinquish all of these when he joined SARS in 2019. The Commissioner's qualifications, and I'm going to start because proudly he holds a Master of Science in Education from the University of the Western Cape. Not only that, he has an honors degree from us, DVC, in mathematics and science education from UWC. But of course, the Commissioner has other qualifications, a Master of Commerce in South African and International Tax Law, cum laude, and as well as a National Diploma in Electrical Engineering. So he has a diverse bouquet of qualifications. He's been awarded the prestigious African American Scholarship and an academic appointment as an Associate in Education at Harvard University. He's a recipient of several awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Management in 2017 from SAPSO, and he was a finalist in the All Africa Business Awards 2016, Dealmaker of the Year 2015, Boss of the Year in 1999. I didn't realize, Commissioner, you had such a rich person in the SARS Commissioner. And of course, he's a visiting professor at the Da Vinci Institute as well as the Free State University, and remains a social activist in his personal capacity. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome our keynote speaker for the seventh annual Archbishop Thabo Makgoba Development Trust Lecture Series. Thank you, Commissioner. You're welcome.
Wow, good evening. Goeienaand. Molweni. Before I dive into the topic, I had a session this morning with some of the African tax officials, a leadership session that we do in conjunction with the World Customs Organization. And one of the students asked me, what triggers me? What motivates me? And I said, I have been blessed by birth. And I'm not talking of being born in Kensington when it was still called the Wild West, and running around on the Western Cape Flats as a young kid and eventually as a scholar, and as you heard, sometimes coming here to pretend to learn. I said the gift that I have is having been born to two people from whom I've learned the most defining lessons of my life. And in fact, long before I got to school and got to university, my father, who has my name and was a slave driver, taught me the ethic of hard work, honest hard work. There is no alternative. And secondly, it was my mother who taught me the purpose of my life. And it's nothing grand, nothing that would make the headlines. It's a simple proposition that I am here to be a blessing. So when I think about why we keep going, when things are tough, I promise you, I know you sometimes see me on television or in the newspaper, and I've got this plastic surgery plastered smile on me, that it is hard out there. It is tough. I also wake up some mornings and feel I want to just give up. I want to just run away. And then it's this compelling proposition that we are here to make a difference that keeps us going. So when I have the opportunity to share this story, I do so as part of the service. The president wrote me a WhatsApp message after our last revenue results, and amongst other things, after thanking us for delivering such a world-class result, he said something which I think is an important message. In a government that is struggling, we characterized with all the news that we have heard, and one of the sentences he said is, "You have shown us that it can be done." And I think every single one of us must take on the challenge to swim against the tide and to show that different outcomes are possible. And it only takes one in a family, one in a township, one in a city to say, "Send me." So let me start by thanking Program Director Professor Sean Pather. Thank you for directing the proceedings. My friend and brother, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. Part of the reason I came is the persuasion of this young lady, Professor Iso, and the fact that you and I could share the same space. The last time we were together, it was on a flight from Johannesburg to Cape Town. Thank you also. I'm humbled by the acknowledgement. Professor Tyron Peterson, in his absence, the very able and capable DVC Professor Levak, and then, of course, the lady who twisted my arm, Professor Michelle Iso. I said I'll come this time, but it must be in person, because last time we were here through the ether. And other members of the executive and management of the university, as you heard, my alma mater, and the students and other guests present. It is certainly an honor for me and a privilege to have been invited to participate in this year's annual lecture. We could not have imagined, after standing in those queues on the 27th of April in 1994, when some of you weren't even born, we could not have imagined that almost 30 years into our hard-fought democracy, that for millions of South Africans, the promise of our Constitution remain an elusive dream. South Africa is often hailed as having one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. For me personally, nothing is more evocative than when we sang earlier, as we did earlier, singing our beautiful national anthem. Nothing is more evocative. And I stand with great national pride whenever we hoist our national flag. This wonderful, colorful flag of the promise of a rainbow nation. But what purpose do these iconic symbols of a democracy serve if the material conditions of many of our brothers and sisters, our fellow citizens, remain unchanged? The stubborn persistence of poverty, inequality, and unemployment remain. The focus by the Archbishop Thabo Makgoba Development Trust on the ravages of poverty, inequality, and unemployment is therefore spot on. I've been invited to share with you a good news story of the South African Revenue Service, and I'm indeed humbled that it is a good news story, but a good news story that none of us should take for granted. Given where we were in 2019, and the program director made some reference to it. I don't know where's the slides. Yes. Oh, there we go. We should not remember where we were, how we got there. And we all have to become activists in standing up and saying, will never allow it to happen again. Because to some extent, we may now, on reflection, say we were innocent bystanders. We did not earn our democracy as bystanders. And we will not retain and improve it as bystanders. And so where were we? Well, don't take my word for it. Judge Nugent, the Commission of Inquiry found that there had been a massive failure of integrity and governance at SARS under the previous leadership. Judge Nugent said that what occurred at SARS was inevitable the moment the erstwhile commissioner set foot in SARS. I quote, "He arrived without integrity and then dismantled the elements of governance one by one. This was more than mere mismanagement. It was seizing control of SARS as if it was his to have." Judge Nugent added, "What occurred can fairly be described as a premeditated offensive against SARS, strategized by the local office of Bain and Company, located in Boston, and for Mr. Moyane to see SARS, each in pursuit of their own interest, that was symbiotic, but not altogether the same. Mr. Moyane's interest was to take control of SARS, and Bain's interest was to make money." Close quote. And so as a result thereof, SARS experienced a decline in institutional integrity and capability. It experienced a decline in revenue performance, a decline in employee morale and trust. There was a disconnect between leadership and employees, and a decline in the hard-won public confidence in SARS. In that time, almost 3,000 staff left. Skills that are essential to the efficacy and the effectiveness of the Revenue Authority. And the organization was meant to be rendered suboptimal in the execution of its mandate. And so, what is its mandate? SARS was created through an act of parliament to make provision for an efficient and effective revenue collection system to facilitate legitimate trade. SARS, therefore, is an administrator of laws. And for those of you who are lawyers, laws are pretty boring. Pretty boring. but they're necessary. But we look beyond the fact that we administer laws and building a complex organization that administers these laws. We derive our inspiration from a self-determined statement of higher purpose. And so we say, while we collect revenue, improve compliance, and facilitate legitimate trade, that's what we do. Why we do it matters. That is our higher purpose. And we live with the sense of privilege and with great humility to know that it is in our hands to have a transformative impact on the lives of South Africans, and in particular, those who are the most vulnerable among us. Because you see, citizens who have financial means, and many of us here in the room are privileged to have such, we can generally insure ourselves against the inefficiencies of a state and the fallout resulting from natural disasters or pandemics such as we've experienced during the COVID-19 period. The current devastating impact of load shedding touches all of our lives. But I have a generator, I have an inverter, I have a battery, and many of you I'm sure have. So we can generally insure ourselves, buy ourselves out of these dilemmas. But the most vulnerable among us, the poorest, some of them are our family, they don't have this. And therefore they are dependent. Poor people remain the disenfranchised and the most vulnerable. And therefore the impact of a well-functioning revenue service, Revenue and Customs Administration, are central to the important objectives of addressing poverty, inequality, and unemployment. These are integrally connected, indivisibly so. During COVID-19, government was able to step up its efforts and provide much needed financial support in the form of social relief of distress grants. Businesses were supported to protect especially SMMEs and to save jobs. Health responses were adequately funded to provide frontline medical staff and important medications, vaccines, and other therapies. All this was made possible because even during the worst stages of lockdown, SARS were able to ensure that the revenue collection system remained intact and stepped up to the challenge. In the first 100 days of COVID, we built 45 additional online applications. All our offices were shut. Only 10% of our staff were remotely enabled. We enabled, in the first 3 months, up to 90% of our staff. We made sure that for ordinary taxpayers and for most taxpayers, they never need to come into a SARS office for 99% of the work they need to do. And so we used COVID-19 to accelerate our modernization to become a smart, modern SARS. All of this, we remain deeply aware of how our work remains central to the response that government exacted. The collection performance of SARS also meant that the government could essentially respond to the pandemic whilst maintaining fiscal discipline. In fact, the finance minister could use some of the over-collection to take off some of the pressure of debt service cost. And every rand that we don't have to pay the bond and interest fees is a rand that can buy another vaccine, that can contribute to another social grant. And so, strengthening our fiscal integrity, even at the time when our demand on finances reached an unprecedented level. I continue to remind those who advocate a tax revolt that withholding one's taxes will hurt the poorest and the most vulnerable. In South Africa, the face of poverty and unemployment is sadly that of a black person in general and a black woman in particular. And so it is in their defense that we lift ourselves up every day to do the work we do. And so I want to share with you some of the thoughts of the recovery, and I can't take you into much detail because they've also been strict with my time. It is indeed a good news story. So I want to cover a few things of this rebuilding process, and the first I want to say is restoring integrity was necessary. And so how did we do this? Well, firstly, we put people first. The soft stuff in any organization is the hard stuff. And we talk about work-life balance, but I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe that work is an expression of your life. We spend so much time at it. We immerse ourselves for various reasons. And so therefore, work must be a place where you can be the best version of yourself and not just an economic unit of work or labor. We have to find ways to merge, not balance, to merge our professional self with our spiritual self, our psychological self, our intellectual self. You can't balance these things. It has to be an integral synthesis of one whole integral person. The word integrity comes from being whole. And so in this regard, the first order of business was to reconnect with our employees and to reintroduce myself. On the first day, which was the 1st of May 2019, a public holiday, I wrote a personalized letter to everyone. In the letter, I made it clear where I stood on the issue of state capture. I didn't want the 12,500 people to think, what does he think about it? I made it clear. I believe that it was a corrupt leadership with the clear intent to undermine and destroy SARS, and that I would step up and do what we need to do to address and confront those who still perpetrate it. And those who were in denial, I said, are either complicit or they are indifferent, and either position is untenable. And in the same letter, I then also said, and this is what you can hold me accountable for. I listed a few things and I said, this is what you can hold me accountable for. And then I said, and this is what I will hold you accountable for. And then I ended my letter by saying, and together we can achieve the following. And I set a list of outcomes on which I will report to you in a few minutes. So it started by nurturing and enabling culture, being clear what was an acceptable behavior. We focus on leadership, also specifically on women in leadership, and bringing in a next generation leadership perspective by creating a junior board of under 35-year-olds, embedding a positive employee engagement, and developing a framework for execution. Because in South Africa, we talk a lot, we don't work. We have an implementation deficiency in many instances. Many of us think that going to meetings and writing reports is work. So during the first months of my tenure, I visited offices, engaged on the front line to genuinely develop an empathy for what employees experienced during this time. It also allowed me to understand and develop the strategic response required to rebuild SARS. We established a listening campaign to allow employees to share their experiences, to provide pastoral support, and for the affected individuals to submit requests for any additional assistance, including forms of reparation. Those were for existing employees. And for employees who had left under circumstances that was not of their own making, we appointed an independent advisory panel that would take representation from former employees who were adversely affected and publicly humiliated during the period of capture. I appointed the advocate for financial compensation, personal and public apologies. We followed a process of restorative justice, which I think, and I'm proud to say, is the first in South Africa following the revelations of the Zondo Commission. It was important for us to bring closure and healing and to make sure that those affected knew that they were heard and that we had some attempt to make good. To ensure that we address employee engagement, we developed and championed a rights charter and say every employee has 5 rights. The right to enjoy your work. You come to work, so some people get up in the morning and they say, "Good morning, Lord," and others say, "Good Lord, it's morning." We don't want our people to be that. So the second is we want everyone to understand the meaning of their work, the impact their work has. Thirdly, to know what winning means. You shouldn't work in the dark. You shouldn't be caught out. Fourthly, you're entitled to regular feedback that will help you to win. And lastly, you must get the sense that you have a fair deal. And so that was an important part of the work we did. The second, a subset of people, was leadership integrity. No one expects us as leaders to be perfect. I am not a perfect leader. They can expect, though, that we be authentic, that we say what we mean and we mean what we say. This means that we show up as stewards rather than lords and masters. And I'm sure the Archbishop will tell you that that's quoted somewhere in Peter. Stewards know that they hold in trust what belongs to another. In the case of the SARS commissioner, he or she holds in trust the interest of the public of South Africa. It means that we are clear where we stand on matters of substance and have the courage to speak out. My day one letter and subsequent video and written communications to our staff sought to demonstrate this clarity unambiguously. When leaders are not clear where they stand and do not communicate this consistently and with simplicity, those who follow will arbitrage this leadership void. But they will also make it hard for exacting consequences and holding people accountable. This, I believe, is one of our huge challenges that affects the public confidence in government. Steward leaders understand that they serve the greater good and not their narrow self-interest. It means that we regard leadership as an inordinate privilege with no sense of entitlement and driven by an incessant yearning to bequeath something greater than what we inherited. We made some tough decisions with regard to strengthening leadership integrity and capability. This meant that we had to confront and part ways with leaders who were considered to be compromised and part of the former leadership regime. We introduced a more fit-for-purpose organizational arrangement. We reassigned others to work that was more suited to them. We introduced clear role accountabilities with specific objectives and measurable results. And we said if it doesn't have a number, it isn't a result. Together, the executive leadership worked to develop an inspiring vision of a smart, modern SARS with unquestionable integrity that could be trusted and admired. You cannot not strive for that when you think you want to take money out of people's pockets, and you can't be. We're not pickpocketers. Okay? We are those who exact the laws that enable and capacitate our democracy. But to do that, we must act beyond any reproach. Our integrity in doing the work we do must be unquestionable. And so we set that as a vision, followed by a strategic intent that says we believe most people are honest, and if we help them, they actually will fulfill their responsibility. And so we framed a platform of voluntary compliance, not coerced compliance. And these were deliberate choices. And then together with the top 70 or so leaders, we developed this. We didn't hire consultants. We said, this is our leadership work. And over the period of 15 months, we developed what I consider to be a scholarly-based, world-class leadership model that we proudly use as what is expected of every leader in SARS. We are unambiguous about what we expect in terms of personal proficiency, the work that you do, and what we stand for. On another day, I can take you into some of the details, and then compositely, we put together a framework within which, one, we engage our staff, and also equipping them for the world of work in the future. Everything that we do is informed by the 9 objectives that flows from our strategic intent. The third that we did was to organize ourselves to win. In other words, build organizational capability. Specific areas of accountabilities were re-established or set up. These included the large and international business segment, the high wealth segment, the capacity to deal with syndicated and tax and customs crime, the litigation division, to name a few. We also established an anti-corruption and integrity unit within SARS to help root out our own organizational inefficiencies and where employees believe it's cool to collude with taxpayers and to perpetrate corruption. To advance greater taxpayer focus, we organized the country into 9 geographic regions and 3 taxpayer segments. And so that's a very high-level extract of some of the things we did. There's a lot more detail behind it. But what I want to share with you is, how are we doing? Are we winning? We do not declare victory, but it is encouraging to share with you the progress we've made in the past 5 years. And for those of you who are MBAs and management scientists, you'll know Kaplan and Norton's work, the balanced scorecard. And so we insist that everything should be measured. Everything should be measured. So the first thing we measured was how we're doing with our revenue collections, our core mandate. And I can proudly share with you, we've had a compound annual growth rate in each of the 3 measures that is above GDP growth. Last year, our top line grew by 9.7% in an economy that struggled at around about 5.5%. Our net revenue grew by almost 8%, and our refunds grew by 18.7%. 5% of the GDP comes in the form of refunds from SARS. That means that we've had a positive impact on tax to GDP growth and a tax buoyancy of above 1. Tax buoyancy is the correlation between growth in the economy and growth in tax revenue, and an effective and efficient revenue service would want to have at least a buoyancy of 1. Ours has been consistently 1 or above, and this past year it was 1.38. In trade facilitation, you see a compound annual growth rate of almost 12%. That's what Kaplan and Norton calls the financial indicators. On compliance, we have started measuring voluntary compliance index because that's our strategic intent, and you see we have gone from 62% to 63, almost 64%. Our compliance revenue, which is the result of a very focused compliance program, has grown from 2019 to this year, by 80%, from 128 to 232 billion rand. This is an impressive and very pleasing result. In 2019, just after state capture, public confidence in SARS was at 48%. We measured it in the first calendar quarter of this year, it was 66%. Attitude towards compliance was 66%, and we measured it in the first calendar quarter, it was 76.5%. So think about this, we take more money out of the pockets of people, because that's where the revenue comes from. We enforce what we need to do, and despite doing that, the public have greater trust in us, and they have a more positive commitment to compliance. And so that's really pleasing for us. Our operational efficiency, we have a long way to go. Every ball we drop really grates us. However, it's pleasing to say that we have gone from 54% to almost 80% in terms of the service charter, which is the level of service we commit to South African public. And then the most pleasing indicator for me is we can do all of that and lose our people. You can see what happened in COVID in 2019. Global employee engagement went from 66% to 65%. In Africa, it went from 65 to 61. In South Africa, it went from 66 to 62. At SARS, we went from 61.6 to 69.4. we bucked the trend. And so here's the composite good news story, that we have become more efficient in administering the laws we have to do, therefore collecting more taxes, improving compliance and facilitation of our trade, our legal mandate, and whilst doing that, have earned a greater level of trust in the public, and our employees feel more engaged and connected to us rationally and emotionally. And so we are really pleased about the story that we can share with you. I want to close by sharing some leadership pointers. First, ask an obvious question. What is leadership? Many of us have the title leadership, but no title can make you a leader. And what does leadership, good leadership, look like is an important question. And for me, there can be no other purpose to leadership but to serve. There can be no other purpose. And for those of you who aspire to greater levels of leadership, I want to tell you, if it is not with a service motive, then I pity those who will have to suffer your leadership. We have to tell a compelling story. This is the power of strategic clarity and a compelling vision that answers 6 important questions all the time. Where are we? Where do we wish to go to? How will we get there? And along the way, are we there yet? How long till we get there? And when will we know we have arrived? Simple story, we translate that into hard measures and measure it every day, every month, every quarter. By every evening, I get an SMS that tells us what revenue we collected. And so, my personal theory of leadership is that no one is entitled to lead. Leadership is an inordinate privilege. It is not a title, but a set of behaviors. You cannot legislate followership. You have to earn it. And leaders must take their work seriously instead of taking themselves seriously. And leadership is about service to others. I call that stewardship. A steward is one who knows he or she holds in trust what belongs to another. It's not theirs. And bringing all this together and to converge with the theme and the focus of the trust, I remind myself of this promise, that we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past. We honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land. We respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this constitution as a supreme law of the Republic. And this is the important purpose: to heal the divisions of the past, to lay the foundations of a democratic and open society, and to improve the quality of life of every citizen and free the potential of every one of our colleagues and fellow citizens. And through that, build a united, democratic South Africa. That's what wakes us up every morning, and despite the many frustrations, keep us going. Thank you very much. I went 4 minutes over. I hope you forgive me.
It was well worth for the 4 minutes extra, Commissioner. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that really inspiring lecture on leadership. There are lots of lessons, but before we get to them, maybe let's just give a round of applause once more. There are lots of very intriguing points that have just been gobsmacked about the SARS journey in that period from 2019. Something perhaps, and maybe this gets written up as a lesson for the rest of public service and leadership in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the point of having Q&A, and we have roughly about just 20 minutes to allow for that, to allow for other parts of this evening to unfold. So Are we also monitoring Q&A from online? Okay. All right. We have roving mics. Where are they? And thank you. We have one here and Justine at the back. So please feel free. Now is your opportunity to pose questions. You might pose something in direct response to something in the lecture itself, or something for comment, or just a comment. So the floor is open, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. There's 4 hands. So let's take those 4 hands. The gentleman in the center, in the order in which I spotted them coming up. You were actually second, but you was 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, hang on, before you speak. The rules of engagement are you've got to make a short, your question must be short, it must be to the point. We are not allowing another public lecture, there's only one, okay? So please, on that order, if you go too long, I'm going to stop you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Atlahan Lekabe. Mine is actually just a comment to the commissioner. I think that's first of all, it's a very wonderful lecture that you have given to us. And secondly, I so wish also there could have been people from financial aid. I think they could have learned a lot of how things could have been done, and how they can move forward, especially dealing in that department. And I also believe that it would have also been such a wonderful lecture to also some of the student leaders on campus, because at this current moment we are faced with a leadership crisis, and I think it would have benefited us as student leaders. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that comment. It's much appreciated. Number 2.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner. My name is Kulani Mhlanga. My question is, it definitely is a good story that you were telling this evening. And one thing for sure is that many other, well, I would say state-owned entities as well, these are the type of stories that we're looking forward to hearing as well. But I believe that, as you've highlighted, that from 2014 until 2019, the story wasn't so good that SARS had to tell. And I largely believe that it was largely an aspect of political interference as well, in the story being a bad story to tell. So same as it is alleged now with ESCOM and other entities as well, the impact of the political power, the political will. So I would like to know from SARS that for someone who one day aspires to tell a good story that you were telling this evening, how does one tend to deal with political interference in such institutions as well? Because one cannot really run away from it. And I think it's evident from how certain state entities have been run. So how does one deal with the aspect of political interference? Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a good question. Number 3.
Evening, everyone. My name is Kokanyi Lamali. I'm also a student here at UWC. I think my question is also along the line of the period between 2014 and 2019, or perhaps it could even go before that. After the report of the state capture was released, I would perhaps like to hear from you if you think that, or if you are confident as the commissioner of SARS that there will be arrests that will be taking place. I think perhaps maybe a lot of South Africans have been hearing about these commissioners and the outcomes, and a lot of people being pointed out as the perpetrators. But as a commissioner, any of the investigations that you have taken, do you think people will be arrested, and perhaps what will be the time frame? Because sometimes we hear that there will be arrests and then they kind of never come. The second question is that I remember I was reading a book, I can't remember, but it was some guy writing about SARS, and they commented quite a lot about Bain and perhaps some of the state actors, I think it was the intelligence services, that had a huge role in kind of crippling the activities of the state, particularly SARS. But I'm just curious to find out, are you aware of any non-state or state actors that have been actively trying to weaken the capabilities of SARS currently? And do you think that, the state security being moved into the president's office, that that has ensured that the state security will be more efficient at safeguarding the activities of SARS?
Okay, thank you. Questions out of the scope of the commissioner, but NPA for the arrests, I'll redirect that. Okay, so we're going to the fourth question, and this will be the fifth, and then we'll take some responses from Commissioner Kisvetter.
Am I loud enough without the mic?
Yeah,
Okay,
please go ahead.
The Russian Jew Abram Joklokov says, the road to truth is lined along the way with annoying little bastards. Now the two bastards there is Thabo. I'll tell you now why. Mani and Tyron is actually scared to be here tonight. And there's a saying, when you help the poor, you do it away from the camera. 9 years ago, I used to pick up 5 and 10-cent pieces in the street. Then the CEO of an insurance company wanted to see me in Joburg. I say yes. Then I hustle for plane fare. Then I must see where I'm going to sleep tonight, and I'm going to get home. In 2027, I would have created 1 million, listen carefully, income earning opportunities in South Africa. That man and that man must help me to take it to 2 million. My wife and I flew back this afternoon. We were in Pretoria. I was with Max on Friday.
Are you getting to a question?
Sorry?
Are you getting to a question?
Yeah, wait. You'll.
You have a minute to get to it.
No, it's fine. I'm creating 1 million jobs, eh?
Yes, of course.
Okay. And it's a pity, and 6 months, my elder son, he was in an interview with Mani and Tyron 3.5 years ago. And I told someone 6 months ago that he's probably going to become the first self-made colored billionaire. And he made a statement the other day, what made me think that that is going to be true. The youngest one finished his master's here.
Sir, I'm sorry.
Wait just a second.
You've got to get to your question because you're not taking up time of others.
The point is, what I'm saying is, okay, what you said is fine, Edwin, about building the tax base. We've become the most unequal society in the country. If we're not going to increase the GDP of the country, we're going to keep on sitting with poverty, inequality, and debt. We don't need more jobs in this country. We need entrepreneurs. That is what we need. And that is what I've got a passion with. I'll engage with them afterwards. My promise is, honestly, by 2027, I would have created 1 million, not jobs, income opportunities. You two must help me to take it to 2 million. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll engage with you. Entrepreneurship is a niche focus of the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences. The fifth and last question in this round is Professor Levak at the front. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I've been so intrigued. I'm hoping that we can publish a lecture with your permission and with the permission of your colleagues. And as you were talking, I was wondering beyond tonight, how do we write up the story of SARS so that we can take from your story the kinds of lessons that can then be replicated in other state-owned enterprises and other kinds of. And we have a strong school of government here within this faculty, and my challenge to my colleagues is get in charge with you, get in touch with you and see in what form we can actually write up the story and tell the story and take those organizational lessons besides the leadership lessons that you've shared tonight quite briefly, because I was interested in the detail that you had in those slides, so that one can learn from that and that we can pay it forward to the kinds of students that we are producing here at UWC.
Thank you very much, Professor Levak. Commissioner.
So to start with the last question, Professor Levak, your dean forced me to compress a 90-minute presentation into 30 minutes. So I hope that it's still coherent. But there's a lot of detail behind that. Lesson for others, I think that I have an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset. So if anyone believes that some of these lessons are useful, we would happily share that with whoever would regard it as useful. Political interference is important, but I think you must be very clear from the beginning. If you don't know what you stand for, you fall for anything. Secondly, never act out of fear or desperation. Be guided by conviction. So I'm clear, when I assumed this role, that if I had any political interference, I would walk. So no one calls me. They greet me, they're nice to me, but they don't call me to ask me to do anything. And so I think that's very important. Be clear where you stand, and if you don't know what you're prepared to die for, you will never know what is worth living for. Okay. That's what we learned from Madiba, who said, this is the ideals of the South Africa I live for and hope to see being realized one day. But if need be, this is the South Africa I'm prepared to die for. And sometimes we are not prepared to die. And I'm not talking of a terminal death where you end up in a grave, but there's a lot of little deaths that must take place. The death of our pride, our ego, leading the contention there. And so be clear what price you're prepared to pay for what you stand for. Will there be arrest and consequences? We've already had quite a number of successes. But remember, the same fate that was affected SARS affected the NPA, the Hawks, the South African Police Force, the SSA. Every institution of government was captured to serve a corrupt intent. And so they are all building and it's struggling. We are not always the most attractive employer. I can't compete with many. I draw employees from the financial services sector at a fraction of what they would earn if they were out there. So our value proposition has to be compelling. But I can tell you, last year we handed over 97 cases to the NPA and had 94 convictions. We have made significant success in a number of big syndicated crimes, some of which is in the media, the gold leaf tobacco thing, lots of gold, leather, clothing, and other syndicated crimes. But it takes long, it takes hard, and sometimes you only have one shot. You saw the dairy farm issues in the Eastern Cape. If you get it wrong, it's hard to come back. The Bain story, we were very clear that Bain has not told us the truth. And when they are now taking us to court because they were blacklisted, banned from doing business, and we said, come forward and tell us. Don't apologize. We don't know what you're apologizing for. Tell us how many times you went to Nkandla. Tell us who you met there. Tell us who you took there. And how is it that you knew a year before the time who the next commissioner of SARS would be? And how is it that on the first day of his appointment, you already had a strategy document for him? And so tell us what really happened, and then we can consider that. There were many actors. This state capture required senior political leaders, senior government officials to collude with private sector agents to defraud the fiscus, to undermine the state, to weaken it, and to steal from ordinary South Africans. What happened at Eskom, what happened at Transnet, what happened at Denel, what happened at Prasa, are all victims of state capture, and the real victims are the people who suffer today without electricity, without proper public transport, without water, and that's really the price we are paying as a society for state capture. The state, I can tell you, is still captured. There are still those who oppose every effort, to undermine every effort. Even within SARS, there are those who are still in denial and still connect in NPA, in SARS. I can tell you that there are still those who undermine the efforts. Of course, we live in an unequal society. SARS can't fix all the problems. We are in our lane and we do what we can do. And yes, we already started writing up the story. We kind of leak it in episodes and chapters, but certainly we have every intention to capture it as a comprehensive story of how to build a capable state, starting with one institution at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Technically, we have 3 minutes of question and answer, so I'm going to allow a single question. At the back, fastest hands first, the lady in blue.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jurina Nkwazi. I'm from the EMS faculty and an ex-SARS employee. I've been following up on the immigration of skilled workers because I have a thing for scarce skills in South Africa. What is your take on the mass exit of skilled workers, because it means that we are losing a lot of taxpayers in a high bracket? That's just something I was wondering about.
Thank you. There is no mass exit. Last year, about 6,000 people left. And we know that because they have applied for financial immigration. The real concern we have is every single South African who leave because they have lost confidence in the system should be mourned. And we should have sleepless nights about the fact. And the sad thing is, these aren't only, if I can use South African labels, not white families only. These are black families who are leaving, who say, I'm going to give my kids a chance and take them to an overseas for a better education. That's the sad truth that we have to deal with. And so from a sentiment perspective and a confidence in the system perspective, every exit should be mourned. From a magnitude perspective and a value perspective, it's still insignificant. The revenue loss is still small. The growth in the tax base year on year has, in the last 4 years, outstripped those who have exited. So our tax base has continued to grow net, and that's positive for us. And I think the most important thing is that we need to grow our economy, improve our productive base. The countries who can survive crises are those who have a strong industrial base, those who have a strong artisanal culture, those where work ethic is high, and who build meritocracies, not, what do we call these things? Deployment or mediocrities because you are loyal to some song or to some ideology. We cannot afford that in South Africa. We need to harvest and harness every single human potential, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what the orientation is. We do not have the luxury to say we don't need you. We need every single South African, every one of our 60 million people. If they can make a contribution, we should open ourselves up to it. And of course, half of them are still under the age of 20 years old. And my concern is that we produce hundreds of thousands of matriculants every year that are largely unemployable for the labor market of the future, because we use matric pass rates as a declaration of victory. rather than people who have been educated and have been prepared for a modern economy.
Thank you.
You can continue.
Thanks. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of Q&A. I just want to I jotted a few highlights, but thank you very much, Commissioner Kiswetter. I think just a few highlights that I took out of the lecture. Number one, which we forget, the role of our elders. And you started off by talking about the role of your parents, and I think that's a very important lesson that we all must never forget, the role of our elders in shaping us, because there's always that wisdom from your elders. And that there is no alternative to honest, hard work. And I hope to all of the students that are out here that you remember that very important principle, that when you get out there, there's nothing else but just honest, hard work. And ladies and gentlemen, the point that we should never, ever again be innocent bystanders. We should never, ever again be innocent bystanders. From the perspective of the organization and its transformation, Commissioner, important issues of the restorative justice, and that's something I wish can become more popularized across the rest of the state. The Employee Rights Charter and the centering of employees in the organization. The smartness and the astuteness in which you've created the voluntary compliance in the tax system. A very difficult thing to shift the mindset of so many millions of taxpayers, and yet you've done it. Importantly, from an organizational leadership, the importance of measurement and the way that in which you honestly and frankly are actually able to measure yourselves. And as a professor of information systems, I just look behind the modernization, and I marvel at the way in which technology has been used in this modernization and to enable you to actually measure yourself, because without that data and being able to transform it, you won't get that SMS every day and those reports. So maybe one day I'd like to, sometime soon, write up a case study about the digital transformation of SARS, because I've marveled it from the days in which we first had online declarations enabled in South Africa. And so at the core of it all, in enabling leadership besides measurement, I think the important point you shared with us all is that of the service motive. And I think that is central to have that at one's heart, to be true and honest, as you've told us, in terms of actually then demonstrating integrity in leadership. Commissioner, thank you very much for the lecture and for sharing that. And perhaps, yes, we'll move towards Prof. Levak having this published in one way or the other. But we also look forward to perhaps, Commissioner, some other kind of relationship with this wealth of knowledge you have on leadership with us as the University of the Western Cape. Ladies and gentlemen, with that summary at hand, I'd like to call upon the chair of our Department of Accounting, who will make the closing remarks. So Ms. Bonita Raymond, please come through.
Thank you so much, Prof. Pather. To our honorable guests, the dear Archbishop Makgoba, and our Commissioner, Mr. Kiswetter, thank you very much for the insightful discussion this evening, and thank you to the audience for your robust engagement on these matters. It was very insightful to actually sit and listen to all of this. Commissioner, I would like to thank you for your commitment to the well-being of our nation and your servant heart. It speaks a lot. As I listened and reflected on the discussion this evening, I'm reminded that it's hard out there, but that we have work to do. And if I summarize all the slides and everything that you spoke to this evening, I can only summarize it as saying you rolled up your sleeves and got to work. You reminded your team of their purpose, you set winning goals, and you stood and still stand for what you believe. And I think, I know that true liberty for all of us will not be reached whilst shackled by the weight of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And I think of a quote from our former great leader, Mr. Nelson Mandela, where he says, "No country can really develop unless its citizens are educated." And truer words I don't think has ever been spoken. It's time for leaders in South Africa to recognize that they serve and work towards the well-being of our nation, and that they are agents of change, and they need to act with the highest level of integrity. We need to, and we will save ourselves. We must prioritize our education, the education of our children. We must create our own opportunities, 2 million jobs in 2027, and get our people working. I think as a country, we can take leadership or at least advice from what you are doing at SARS. We can keep our country buoyant as SARS has started tax buoyancy. Ladies and gentlemen, this mic is too high. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our lecture series. Thank you for being here with us. But before we end off, there's a few thank yous. And on behalf of the Dean of the EMS faculty, Professor Iso, I would like to thank you, the Archbishop, and your special guest here tonight, the Commissioner of SARS, our DVC academic, Professor Levak, representing the Rector, Professor Thabo Pretorius, our Professor Sean Pather, thank you for doing an excellent job at being Program Director this evening, our colleagues from Institutional Advancement, representing media is Mr. Gesanta Bada, Ms. Nashira Davids, and their team, and representing events, Ms. Melody Williams. But as we know, events like these don't come together with the click of our heels. There are so many people working behind the scenes, making sure that the event is a success. I would like to thank CPS. Thank you very much for security services. Audiovisual services for their technical support. Technical services for keeping our backup generator ready. We must always try to stay 2 stages ahead of Eskom. And then to our colleagues in assets and metro cleaning for the wonderful layout of this venue and the cleanliness thereof. I would also, at this point, like to extend a warm thanks of gratitude to the Dean's Office and the faculty admin colleagues. And at this point, I would like to mention an honorable mention to one particular colleague, Ms. Shanaz van der Schuyf. Shanaz, on behalf of the Dean and the rest of the leadership team, we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to you for all your effort and endless planning that you have undertaken to make this event a success. We appreciate you more than you'll ever know. With that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. Bonnie has technically closed the evening, but I'd like to ask Bonnie to please present a gift of appreciation on behalf of the faculty to Commissioner. You want to do it here in front of the... Photo. Yes. I don't know if Dean and Prof. Levak, you want to join the photo opportunity. Please do, Arch, and yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for some light refreshments. At 8 p.m., there will be load shedding, so please don't be worried if we go into darkness for a very few seconds or half a minute or so. Enjoy the rest of your evening and travel safely. Okay.